Beau is afraid, and so am I. Ari Aster returns for his third directorial outing, the same guy that did Midsommar and Hereditary, which is one of my all-time favorite horror movies. The film stars Joaquin as he journeys through a 3-hour-long odyssey to get to his mother. Along the way, he's forced to face his anxieties head-on in a fever dream of a movie that tracks from cityscapes to the wilderness, even going as far as an extended animated sequence that's just a small piece of one wild ride. This is the most polarizing film of the year, and for good reason. Ari Aster really tries your patience throughout the entirety of this long runtime, and it'll ultimately leave many dissatisfied, frustrated, and very confused. And I seem to be in the minority because I absolutely loved it. But one of the things I admire most about this movie is that Ari Aster told the story he wanted to tell, and it often came across as him knowing he may never have an opportunity to do something this grand in scale and wacky in context ever again. I've rarely seen this much negativity for an independent movie, especially one that's not connected to a large franchise that massive amounts of audiences are passionate fans for. It's to the point where on social media, you're condemned for either loving or hating the movie. People are literally standing up in the theater trying to silence anyone who may voice their appreciation for the movie or clap. It's gotten insane, and while most of the overt reaction to the film isn't necessary or justified, in my opinion, it's understandable to an extent. This is a premise that on paper seems pretty straightforward, but in the final product is quite the opposite. Aster plays with your mind, begging for the viewer to differentiate reality from Beau's skewed perspective. Beau is tormented, manipulated, all while trying to make sense of the supposed truths he's been told his entire life about life itself. And I think it's up to the audience to decide what to believe, but ultimately I see Beau Is Afraid as a grandiose surrealist world in and of itself that isn't supposed to be taken as realism, but more rather Aster bringing to life his weirdest and darkest thoughts regardless of if it makes him look like an absolute madman. The entire thing is lacking any common structure. It doesn't follow the standard 3-act formula. There isn't any direct path. It has a lot to say about perception and the idea that the world is never straightforward, even in the context of this story in which all he's trying to do is get home to his mother. It shines a light on the worst aspects of people and the world and the cruelty shown against those, in this case Beau, who are actively trying to do what's right. The film is colored with vibrancy and grandiosity, but the foundation is made up of so much filth. The entire thing, however, doesn't work without the incredible performance from Joaquin. In past films, he's gone completely insane, while on the opposite end of the spectrum also being very, very restrained and laid back and very calm. For the most part, I would say he stays more on the side of calm in this movie, but not without injecting moments of absolute terror and tragedy and helplessness. Beau is a character that at this point in his life, he is very much unable to think for himself. He's been coddled by his mother his entire life, told exactly how he needs to act, who he needs to be, how he needs to think, to the point where now he doesn't make decisions on his own. He can't think of logical next steps without getting some sort of support or guidance from someone. And his anxiety is through the roof because of it. And finally, when he decides to confront those issues that he's had with his mother and just with life itself, stuff happens. It gets weird. A lot of it is unexplainable. But I think Aster does a great job at crafting a character that you can't always tell 100% of the time what he is imagining and what is actually reality. You can't always rely on him to give you an accurate point of view of how things are actually playing out, because you are in his perspective the entire way through. And because of that, it does make you question how things are actually happening. But at the same time, more times than not, it almost feels like he is this person who is struggling, trying to do the best he can in a world that is just filled with so much hatred, that is just filled with so much bad. And while it's all scaled to such an unbelievable level, there is a lot of commentary on today's society. And I think if you actually pay close enough attention, that in the midst of all this madness happening, in the midst of all the insane ideas and concepts that are just thrown to the screen here, there is some truth to it. There is some things that really shine through that personally I latched onto it. I thought it made sense, and for the most part I enjoyed the story that was being told. Regardless of what you think about the movie and what you think about Ari Aster's career as a whole, there has to be some appreciation there, and I think without a doubt you can't deny the artistry, the attention to detail, the passion that goes into his work in every single element. And putting the story aside, just from a technical aspect alone, this movie shines, and it does a lot of things incredibly well. From the absolutely bombastic set pieces to just the way that everything is weaved together, the incredible cinematography, the idea that never at one point in this movie do you know what's going to come next. Aster definitely seems like the type of guy that comes up with things as he's writing it. He doesn't just have an entire written diagram from A to Z of how he wants things to go. He feels it as he's coming up with it in the moment, and it comes off that way. And a lot of times that can come across as lazy, but I think in this case, he really submerges himself in his work, that he puts his all into every single detail, and that shows. Do I think everything works here? No. This is definitely not a perfect movie. There are a lot of flaws with it, and I think that just comes with it being such a grand idea. I think it's extremely ambitious, but oftentimes the execution doesn't meet the ambition. I think Aster has a tendency to overextend on these ideas and reach for things that could have been done a lot more simplistically, but the messiness and the lack of structure, while not perfect, and while I do take issue with some of it, actually adds to the charm of the movie for me, and it made me appreciate it more, just because you can tell this is a guy having fun with a decent sized budget, with a studio, an A24 that just trusts him in everything he's doing. He didn't have anybody telling him, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. For the most part, they went with exactly what his idea for the movie was, and that's impressive to me. There's not a lot of studios out there like A24 today that have that much trust in their filmmakers, that they want them to see their visions through without a lot of notes or interference or changes that they say have to be made. At the end of the day, A24 knew that this movie was not going to appeal to everybody. In fact, it was going to alienate a lot of people, and that this was going to actually impact an extremely small niche group of people, but they also know that you can't appeal to everybody all of the time, and no matter what you make, there's going to be some people that are not going to like it. I think the reason that Aster's previous two movies, while still polarizing to an extent, were more well received is because they're very much more of a straightforward idea. They're very much one thing. They fit into more so one genre than another. This movie plays with a bunch of ideas, it plays with a bunch of themes, a bunch of genres. It's not specifically one thing. People are going to go to this movie to see a studio horror movie, and they're going to come out with this movie that is very much not that at all. There is some horrifying imagery, but I think it's just as horrifying as it is hilarious. There are so many moments throughout this movie that had me cracking up, and I would say 3/4 of the way are purely comedy. Not only self-deprecating on Aster's part, but also very situational, and there's a lot of set pieces that add to the comedic moments, and there's things in the background and the foreground that play into that moment. And there's also a lot of moments to where things will happen that seem very minute, that seem very unimportant, until a few minutes later that moment comes around full circle and there's a payoff to it. And with all this complexity and with the film being all over the place, I do feel like the ending of the movie was written from the very beginning. It was predictable, and when that actually happens, a lot of people are going to be dissatisfied, but for me, I saw it coming, and the way that it was executed really worked. Following all the way into the end credits, I think this movie does something very interesting with the end credits, and it really just sort of, in a way, shines a light on the exact people that come out of this movie condemning people for liking it or hating it or however they feel. I think it was really tasteful. I think it was really unique, and it stuck with me. Obviously, the film has had a very small release, and it's slowly getting out to more and more theaters, and it took me a while before I was able to see the movie myself. But when I went into the theater, I sat down with 7 other people. By the end of the movie, there was only one other person in there. And in fact, they were sitting on the same row as me, and as the credits rolled, and as I began to get up, that person said, "Hey, what'd you think of the movie?" And I said, "You know what? I think I loved it." And they said, "Me too. It gets better upon rewatch. This is my 3rd time seeing it." And at that point, I was like, what? That's insane, because this is definitely not a movie I can see myself going back to again and again. But it is one that I really appreciate, and it is one that I think is going to establish a cult following for those people that are able to look through the silliness and see the ideas that Aster was trying to get across here. But at the end of the day, like what you're gonna like, dislike what you dislike, but don't judge others for being the same way. Overall, I really did enjoy Beau Is Afraid. It's definitely the weirdest thing that's going to come out all year, and I do also think that it's probably the weakest of Ari Aster's filmography, but that's not a bad thing. He just makes really good movies. But with all that being said, I'm going to have to give Beau Is Afraid an 8 out of 10.
Wow.
So if you've seen the movie, make sure to comment down below and let me know what you thought about it. Are you in the camp that loved it or hated it? I'd like to hear all of your thoughts. Let's get a discussion starting down below in the comments. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, I'll see y'all later. Peace out.